Hello everybody, how you doing? Welcome to the lesson. It's our final lesson this week. So what I want to do first of all is I don't want you to have the PowerPoint open. I don't want you to have anything open. I'm just going to ask you 4 questions based on our introduction to Andre Bazin last lesson. And I just want to see if you can remember, okay? So the point of this is that you don't look. It's not going to do you any favours to look. You need to know, yeah, I knew that, didn't know that, and then you know what you need to go and get. Okay, so be honest, it's really important. Okay, so so make sure you've got a blank piece of paper. We've got 4 questions. Question 1. Bazin co-founded which magazine in which year? Okay, so question 1. Bazin co-founded which magazine in which year? I'll give you 10 seconds or so. All right, question 2. How many film articles is he estimated to have written? So how many film articles is he estimated to have written in his short life? Question 3. He died in what year? Aged how old? Okay, so he died in aged. You fill in those blanks. Final one. His posthumous book of collected writing was called. I hadn't frozen then, I'm asking you the question. So what was his posthumous book of collected writing called? One of the most influential, important books in all of film academia. Okay, there's your 4 questions. So let's go through the answers, see what you knew. Okay, so question 1, Bazin co-founded which magazine in which year? Answer, Cahiers du Cinema, 1951. Okay, so we should have had that, Cahiers du Cinema, 1951. Question 2, how many film articles is he estimated to have written over the course of his writing career? 2,000. So somewhere around 2,000 film articles. He died in 1958, aged just 40 years old. So that's 1958, aged just 40 years old. And his very famous book of writing, his collected works, which was published after his death, is called What is Cinema? What is Cinema? Okay, so that's where we were up to. Okay, so I kind of want to move on a little bit from there now today. So if you could go to, on the Andre Bazin PowerPoint, if you could get to slide 6 for me. Okay, slide 6. What we're going to do now is, before we look at kind of get into the debate of this anymore, I want to break down a little bit what Andre Bazin's beliefs were, why we're looking at him. We're not just looking at him because he was a wildly influential figure in terms of cinema and film writing and film academia. I mean, that's a good reason to look at him, but that's not the reason. The reason that we're looking at him is because he is integral to the debate around whether cinema should be realist, whether it has a duty or a moral obligation to be realist, or whether cinema should aim to be as expressive and subjective as it possibly can. Okay, so he's at the centre of this debate. The reason he's at the centre of this debate is because he was absolutely dedicated to cinematic realism. Like on an almost religious level, he believed it was the divine calling of cinema. Okay, and so I want to set out his arguments for cinematic realism and have a look at a couple of examples. And then I want to look at the opposite of that argument, which is, well, cinema should maybe be as expressive as it possibly can be, and look at a couple of examples there. And then I'm going to ask you to kind of make a judgment call and write something on the debate. Okay? You've already touched on that. Remember I said last week, I want you to just kind of have a go at what do you think without the context. Hopefully by the end of this lesson you will have the context. Then I'm really interested to find out whether your opinion changes or not based on that, okay? So slide 6, let's go through some of this on slide 6, okay? So cinematic realism. Bazin was absolutely dedicated to the idea of cinematic realism. It's like a calling for him, and it's what he wrote a lot of his articles about. He felt that cinema had a moral obligation to document the reality of the world without attempting to apply a subjective viewpoint. Okay, so it had to be as objective and realist as possible. You could not apply a subjective viewpoint according to Bazin. That was perfect cinema according to Bazin. So Bazin made a crucial distinction between two things. So this is his quote, so make sure you get that quote down, and remember, keep making notes, not just on the PowerPoint, but also what I'm saying. So Bazin made a crucial distinction between those directors who put their faith in the image and those who put their faith in reality. So that was a crucial distinction for him. Directors who put their faith in the image and directors who put their faith in reality. And of course, Bazin worshipped those directors who put their faith in the reality of what they were capturing, okay? Not the constructed image. He mistrusted any overt manipulation of images, okay? So that could be montage editing, it could be stylized lighting, expressive production design. So anything that didn't kind of reflect the world as it was. Okay, anything that heightened it, made it subjective, made it grotesque, made it larger than life, made it exaggerated or stylized. No, that was no good to Bazin. He mistrusted that. Okay, he was very apprehensive about anything that supported, and here's the quote, so write it down. Very apprehensive about anything that supported the creation of a sense or meaning not proper to the images themselves, but derived entirely from their juxtaposition. Okay, I'll say that again. So he was apprehensive about anything that supported the creation of a sense or meaning not proper to the images themselves, but derived entirely from their juxtaposition. Okay, so what he means by that is the moment that you put 2 or 3 images together, this image, and you cut to that, and then you cut back to this, or you cut over to there, what you've done is you've manipulated time and space. You are putting things together for a purpose, for a subjective purpose, okay? And if the images you've put together don't exist together in the natural world, they don't exist together in the real world, then you are manipulating. It's essentially propaganda for your own ideology, and Bazin didn't like that, okay? Bazin's ideal camera shot, ideal film would be here, wide shot, film it, okay? Show me what happens. The moment you're manipulating imagery, any montage, any parallel editing, any juxtaposition, no, that's your subjective viewpoint coming through and not the world itself, and he was very mistrustful of that, okay? Essentially, he felt that image should speak for itself. The viewer should be left to interpret the image in whatever way they wanted. Okay? So the image should speak for itself. The director should not attempt to make you think about the image in a certain way. The director should just show you the image, and then it's up to you as an active audience member to interpret that image in the way that you see fit. The moment a director shows you this image in this way, with this lighting and this colour, and the actor over here, and then he cuts to another thing over there, the moment that that happens, you're being manipulated and pushed into a certain viewpoint, and Bazin hated that. Okay, he thought, show the image in as realist a way as you can, and then let me make up my own mind, let us make up our own mind about the image. Okay, he felt that to overly stylize, to overly edit, was to force a particular ideological viewpoint onto the spectator. Okay, the moment you start to edit light, colour, all of these things, you're forcing a particular ideology onto the audience, and he did not like that at all. Okay, so that's Bazin's belief about cinematic realism, what cinema should and shouldn't be. Okay, what I want you to do now on slide 7, I've included a couple of little clips here that I want you to watch and make some notes on what makes them examples of cinematic realism. Okay, so the first one there is a very famous film by the Lumiere brothers, one of the first ever films. As you can see, it's 1895, which is the year of the birth of cinema, and the Lumiere brothers were there. They pretty much invented it. So Arrival of the Train at La Ciotat is a very famous film, and it's a kind of film about, it's a train arrives at the station, that's it, okay? And it's gone down in film mythology, of course, because the myth is that at the screening of this, it's one of the very first films that anyone, anywhere had ever seen, the audience sat down, and as the train came into the station and came towards the camera, the audience got up and panicked and ran to the back of the cinema because they were convinced the train was coming towards them in real life. And that sounds stupid to us now, but if you think about it, then in 1895, there had never, ever, ever been a moving image before. Can you imagine how your mind would be blown if you saw full size a train coming towards you, a moving image? They'd never seen a moving image before. Of course they panicked. They didn't know what kind of weird witchcraft this was. Okay, so it's a very famous film for that, and an example of the Lumiere brothers' commitment to realism. They would often just film what they saw. And then there's a sequence from Citizen Kane which uses certain techniques like deep focus cinematography and one take in order to convey the action in the scene, which is something Bazin really loved. One take meant no editing. Deep focus meant you could see everything, and it was up to you what you decided to focus on. Okay? You were not being told, now look here, now look there. So even something like shallow focus, Bazin was like, no, let me decide. I want to interpret it my way, not your way. Okay? So look at those two, make some notes on what makes them cinematic realism, and I'll see you back here in 10 minutes. Cheers, guys. So I hope you enjoyed those sequences. I always think it's just so wonderful to watch the train at La Ciotat, because it's like you're watching a piece of film history. It's incredible to imagine yourself there in that cinema watching that for the first time, how incredible that must have been. And the Wells Citizen Kane clip is obviously just, it's a masterpiece, and that sequence is just incredible. But you can see how really Wells is letting the audience do the work. He's not overly manipulating that sequence. Now, there are loads of other sequences in Citizen Kane where he absolutely does. But that sequence is kind of pure in the Bazin sense of the word, okay? So let's now look at expressive cinema, so the stuff that Bazin did not like, okay? Let's look at what that was. Slide 8 on the PowerPoint. Let's go through. So expressive cinema. Many of the most important cinematic movements in the entire history of cinema have been driven primarily through their highly expressive use of film form, or their highly expressive use of film narrative. Okay? They were not realist, they are expressive. This includes the Nouvelle Vague, okay, and the French New Wave, which we'll study next year. It includes the Soviet montage that we talked about, Eisenstein, Strike, and Man with a Movie Camera is all about intellectual montage and the juxtaposition of images. And then German Expressionism, which we've studied. We know already that German Expressionism is entirely devoted to the stylized, subjective nature of filmmaking. So all of these things, all of these famous and substantial film movements are what we would call expressive cinema, and would not be of interest to Bazin. The irony about that with the French New Wave, obviously, is that Bazin, as the co-founder of Cahiers, is kind of like the grandfather of the French New Wave. He ushered in, Truffaut and Godard and all these kind of thinkers on cinema, who then went on to create this highly expressive, stylized movement, which Bazin would have hated. So it's really interesting that. There's a bit of a tension there, I think. So, expressive cinema. Each of these movements sought to push a subjective or an auteur-driven vision via their manipulation of time and space. Bazin was not happy with the auteur putting his stamp on the work, because then it's such an example of personal expression that it defeats the purpose of cinema, according to Bazin. You should be showing me the world. You should be showing me the world. I don't need your filtered version of the world. So he was absolutely against auteur-driven cinema. They would manipulate time and space. We had non-linear editing, fragmented narratives, stylized mise-en-scène, very expressive cinematography. All of these things were the opposite of what Bazin felt cinema's true calling was. Okay, and the thing about Bazin, we'll talk about this later, is that he was a very religious man, and he felt that your duty, if you had the film camera, your duty was to just capture what was already there in the natural world, because how could you improve on that? How dare you even try to improve on that and manipulate the natural world as God had put it there? That was Bazin's idea. I think that's why people refer to him sometimes as a priest or a saint, because he had this quality about him, this divine kind of appreciation of nature, and that we had no business manipulating it in that sense. If we look at German Expressionism in terms of expressive cinema, hugely expressive approach to cinema, utilised to explore in a very abstract and therefore perhaps less painfully real way the socio-political climate of Germany at the time in the Weimar Republic and its impact on the people and the culture. So German Expressionism is really interesting because it's dealing with very real pain and emotion and guilt and fear and chaos. It's very real, that. But maybe for the Germans at the time and the German artists, it was far too painful to just show that. They couldn't just show the devastation in a realist way. Too hard, too painful. So they made it grotesque and abstract and exaggerated as a way to deal with it in some fashion. And I think that's really important. Okay. In general, expressive cinema, this would be our argument from this side, okay? Expressive cinema allows the director to not only acknowledge the artifice of cinema itself, but then to use the tools of that artifice as a way to explore a variety of rich and personal ideas and themes via a heightened artistic aesthetic, okay? So there is one argument that using these artificial means is perhaps more honest than attempting to be realist. Because the moment you attempt to be realist in cinema, you're kind of lying, because cinema is not realist, cannot be realist. One of the arguments we're going to get into next week is, can cinema ever really be realist? We talked about this when we did City of God. Can cinema ever really be authentic and true and realist? The moment you turn the camera on, that's you. Okay, that's not the world anymore. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. And the argument in favour of expressive cinema is that at least expressive cinema is being honest about the artificial, constructed nature of cinema. It's saying, yeah, of course this is constructed. Of course this is artificial. Okay? And I'm going to use that, I'm going to heighten that to try and explore something very, very real, something true. Okay? That's our argument for expressive cinema. A couple of expressive cinema clips then to look at. On slide 9, I wanted to, because the realist and expressive debate is often split from the early cinema between the Lumiere brothers and Georges Méliès, who we've talked about. We've looked at the Lumiere brothers, the arrival of the train at La Ciotat. Let's look at Georges Méliès. So I've got a link there to The Journey to the Moon, or The Voyage to the Moon, which is his very, very famous, fantastical piece from 1902. Just a wonderful piece of fantasy, science fiction, maybe the first science fiction movie. So have a look at that. It's just so inventive, so expressive, okay? And then I've got a sequence, an incredible sequence from Metropolis. And now Metropolis is another example of German Expressionism from the same year as Sunrise. So you could argue that 1927, like we've said, is both the high point of German Expressionism and the absolute peak of silent cinema. And in that same year, we get Sunrise and we get Metropolis by the two directors most associated with German Expressionism, Murnau and Lang. Okay, so have a look at that wonderful sequence from Metropolis and see how expressive it is, and make some notes. What makes these sequences examples of expressive cinema? Make your notes, and I'll see you back here in 10 minutes. Thanks, pals. Hey, welcome back. I hope you enjoyed looking at those sequences. They're just wonderful, right? They're just wonderful. The Voyage to the Moon is so inventive, so creative, so expressive in how it communicates, okay? It's just, to think that that's 1902 is absolutely insane. And also, again, I couldn't recommend the film Hugo highly enough, the Scorsese film, which features the making of that. from Scorsese's perspective. It's a film about Georges Méliès, so do watch that. It's wonderful. It's kind of a children's film, family film, but it's great. And then the Metropolis sequence is just unbelievable in terms of its composition, in terms of its editing, in terms of its stylized nature. It's just a remarkable scene from a truly remarkable film. So I want to tie this together now. This is the last thing we're going to do, and then I'm going to leave you with a task to complete for next week. Okay? I just wanted to tie together some of the loose ends of this debate. Okay? So on slide 10, this is the last thing I'm going to go through. Is just to tie some of these things together now through Bazin's ideas. So as you can see, slide 10. Bazin especially objected to German Expressionism and Soviet montage too. He really disliked these movements. Okay, he felt Soviet montage splintered reality in its use of juxtaposition, because that's what it was doing. Remember, it was that intellectual montage, the seemingly random juxtaposition of images that then you put together to make the whole. Okay, and it was so subjective and so stylized. He really didn't like it, and he didn't like it from an ideological perspective. He said it forced the viewer into a highly politicized viewpoint, which to him verged on propaganda. Okay, so the fact that these films were very political, were making us think certain political ideas. They were very sympathetic to the workers. They were very kind of like, you know, in terms of their ideas, they were highly politicized. Bazin didn't like that. He wanted to be left to make up his own mind about the world around him. It was not the duty of the filmmaker to force a political perspective onto you. And that's what he felt Soviet montage filmmaking was doing through its use of juxtaposition and intellectual montage. Okay, German Expressionism, he felt, with its highly stylized lighting, its highly stylized mise-en-scène, he felt it was a willful attempt to obscure reality. So they were really attempting to obscure and hide the reality of the world. And he felt that the films were trying to reflect perverse states of mind, which sounds to us now very kind of moralistic, almost Victorian kind of moralistic, but he just felt that it wasn't right to inhabit the mind of a character, to be that subjective. He just felt it was reflecting these perverse, dangerous states of mind, and that we should be shown the world as it was. So he did not like those two movements at all. Okay. I mean, I hugely disagree with him on these things, but you cannot deny that Bazin is one of the most important thinkers and writers about cinema. So significant, and his writing is beautiful, whether you agree with it or you don't. So what did Bazin like? Because it's hard, isn't it? Because you think to yourself, well, you know, if you follow the logical conclusion of what Bazin wants, it's turn the camera on and frame a wide shot up and off you go. And that's it. And it leaves, there's not much there else that the filmmaker can do. But there are some things that Bazin really liked. Okay, so film form that he liked, diegetic sound. Okay, when sound came in, Bazin was a big fan of that, because now we could hear the real world. We could hear people talking. It was a step towards realism. That's the same with colour. When colour came in, the camera is increasingly reflecting the world as it was. Okay, because the world is not black and white and now suddenly it's colour. The world is not silent and now we can hear language. Very important to Bazin. He loved those things. Deep focus cinematography was very important to Bazin, like the Orson Welles Citizen Kane clip that we've just looked at. The idea that you could see the whole of the frame and the composition, and it was up to you where your attention was drawn. Okay, long takes. So keep the camera rolling, have the sequence play out naturally as possible. Don't try and edit, don't try and juxtapose, don't try and parallel edit, even continuity editing. I mean, continuity editing was okay for Bazin because it was attempting to recreate realism, okay? But the moment you were juxtaposing, fragmented, parallel editing, no, okay, as far as Bazin was concerned. So continuity editing and long takes, all those examples of film form really important to Bazin, okay? Maybe why he loved Chaplin so much. Chaplin was one of his all-time favourite directors because Chaplin utilised all of those things. Although Chaplin was slapstick, he was kind of reflecting things as they were in a way. There wasn't stylised sets, there wasn't stylised lighting, there was often very long takes. It was all continuity editing, deep focus cinematography. He felt that those techniques defined what cinema should be, which was realist.
Okay, they define what cinema should be. Realist. So, I'm going to leave you with a task now to complete across the weekend for next lesson. Okay, and it's on slide 11. Now, we've looked at this debate before, but now we've got loads more information. Loads more information. You've seen the Lumiere brothers. You've seen Georges Méliès. You've read about Bazin and what he thinks. Okay, we know about Expressionism. We've got all this material now. Has it changed your mind? So the debate, do you think cinema, with its unique ability to literally capture the realism of the living world, has a moral obligation, a duty to do so, as Bazin thought? Or do you feel that cinema should use all of the technical tools at its disposal to communicate an expressive, subjective vision that might distort the real world? Which do you think? Okay, which do you think? Because this is, very likely to be a question on the exam, something like this. So you need to have thought about it. You need to have got your ideas down. Okay, they need to be informed ideas. Now you are informed. You know about Bazin, you know about Expressionism, you know about Méliès, about the Lumiere brothers, you know about all of this stuff now, modernism and the Weimar Republic. You know it. Form an informed decision, okay, an opinion. And I want you to get it down passionately, enthusiastically, with examples and references to Bazin, references to German Expressionism, references to the Lumiere brothers and Méliès. Get it down on one page, almost like a speech. Okay, I want it to be passionate. And this is what you need to do now. Now, if you can see both sides of the coin, fine. But I want you to make the argument for both sides of the coin passionately. If you're looking at that and thinking, no, it's 100% this, get it down. And take the other one and tell me why it's wrong. Get in a debate, tell me why you're right. Even if your opinion is it's both, it's a combination of both or whatever it might be, tell me why you're right. Explore both. Okay? If you think one is wrong and the other is right, tell me why that one's wrong and tell me why that one's right. Get it down, one page. I'm going to be asking you to send it in to me next week. Okay? That's your homework. Thank you for being here for the lesson. Have a wonderful weekend.